In the last few videos talking about what we've done at Cisco, we've discussed where we started. We started with the best team study. We started with our technology, TeamSpace. And we've talked about then what we've done since then, a focus on intelligence for teams, a focus on measurement, a focus on listening, a focus on training, a focus on Leader Day, our global event for all the team leaders at Cisco, and a few other things too. What we're going to talk about for the remainder of this series is where we're going next, what we think the next problems are that we need to solve. Again, in the spirit of how do we build the best support system, if you like, for every team and every leader. How do we create an organization where every single employee feels that they do their best work in the best team they've ever been on? One of the things that is at the forefront as we think about this is the eternal question of performance management, if you like. Now, a long time ago, we moved away from performance ratings because we found it wasn't actually necessary to have a number standing between the team leader's recognition of something they needed to respond to and their action in response to whatever they'd seen, whether that was on the plus side of performance or on the negative side of performance. So no more performance ratings. And so what that helped us understand is what are the questions that still need to be solved in terms of helping people perform at their best, and in terms critically of giving the organization insight into patterns of performance. There are two things that we've done and are in the middle of refining. One is that we've defined a thing called a talent review as a very local event, a very local ritual. A talent review for us is a team leader and their direct reports discussing their direct reports in turn. So it really encompasses three levels of the organization. We won't have talent reviews where leaders are talking about people 6 organization levels removed from them or off in some other part of the organization. We want talent reviews to be focused only on people who are known to one another, so that when you're reviewed, you know the people who are talking about you and you feel comfortable that they're familiar with what you've done in the last few months. Then what we've also done is as part of that core ritual of talent review, which we do quarterly or twice a year throughout the organization, what we've also done is change the questions that we ask. Instead of asking for evaluation, instead of asking for assessment, we've instead asked for investment. So not how would you assess this person, but what would you do? What action would you take? All the research we've done into data reliability tells us pretty clearly that when you ask a human being to assess another human being, you get bad data because we're all unreliable raters of others. But when you ask a human being what they would do, what their future intent is, you get great data because we're all really good reporters on what we intend to do next. You get reliable data. So what we're doing in talent review is shifting our emphasis, not from how would you assess this person to how would you invest in this person. Would you send them to training? Would you develop them? Would you assign them a coach? Would you look for a mentor? Would you introduce them to a new body of work? Would you look for a rotation? Would you think about changing their compensation? Would you recommend them for a bonus? Those are all choices which team leaders can tell us reliably whether they would use. In the future, we'd like to ask, instead of a self-assessment for a team member, and you all remember writing those, where you had to sit down and say, well, I did this very, very well, and I did this very, very well too, and I didn't do this quite as well as I could have done, but honestly, I've learned from my mistakes, I will be a better person going forward. Instead of that somewhat ridiculous exercise, what if we had a self-investment assessment, if you like? What if we asked each team member, how would you like us to invest in you? What would you like us to do to help support you in your work? That wouldn't be the end of a conversation. That would be the beginning of a really interesting conversation between a team leader and a team member. You want me to invest like this. I think the best investment is here. Let's figure out what that is. Again, in the spirit of scaling investment in careers to every one of our employees, because every one of our employees deserves that and every one of our employees can grow. Now, if you take all of these different investment decisions and aggregate them up into the organization, you can then see patterns. And this, of course, becomes the foundation for an organization review. And the focus shifts from being about a particular person somewhere down here to whether we followed through on our investments. If we agreed in our series of nested talent reviews in our organization over the last 12 months, if we agreed that this number of people would develop best in a new role, how many of them have we moved to a new role? If we agreed that this many people deserved a bonus, how did we follow through on that? If we agreed that this many people needed to work with a coach, how did we follow through on that? It means that the role of the organization overall should, I think, shift from being about trying to understand the truth of an impossibly large number of people at work, because the only people who can really do that are the team leaders. So shift from trying to understand the truth to holding people accountable for actions that they've committed to further down the organization. And the funny thing about that is you don't need ratings to do any of that. You don't need a 9 box to do any of that. You don't need potential scores to do any of that. And if you think through the lens of let's understand the right investments, talk about the investments, and then follow through on the investments, you find out that you don't need any of the things which cause so much stress and so much consternation in the world of performance management. We don't need assessment. All we need is investment. Do you want me to wait for the sirens to finish, or are you just happy with the NYC vibe?